I think the Big Ten is top heavy, just like it's been the last couple years. I think there's a pretty big gap, frankly, behind Ohio State, Oregon, and everybody else. Now, I think Michigan and Penn State are closer than the others, but if you want to get beyond Michigan and Penn State, I think there's a gigantic gap between them and USC, who I would have as the fifth best team coming into the 2024 season. Hello and welcome. It's always college football. Today is the day after Father's Day. For those of you that are dads out there, happy belated Father's Day from all of us here at Always College Football. I know I had a great time with my kiddos. We had a blast. We were out on the water pretty much all day long, but we were thinking about some ball. We had the UFL championship that went down. I was like, man, kind of got the wheels spinning a little bit, had some US Open action, had some heartbreak for Rory McElroy. So a lot that we kind of enjoyed as far as the sports world is concerned in the last 24 hours. But you know, here on Always College Football, what we're focused on. And today we're going to go through a laundry list of, I guess you could say, bold claims, bold statements, if you will, about some teams kind of all throughout the country. And we're going to decide whether or not we love the statement, we like the statement, or not so fast, my friend. Meaning we don't like it at all. Basically, we can't stand it. So either way, that's kind of where we're going to go today. A bunch of different topics. We'll hit Penn State. We'll hit USC. We'll hit the Big Ten. We'll hit the SEC. We'll hit a couple of sleeper teams. Like, we'll kind of be all over the place. So you want to stick with us. There's a lot of teams that we mentioned today, and your team might be one of us. We continue to ask all of you to continue to like, rate, and subscribe to the show wherever you get your show. Always means a lot to us when you guys follow the show, to see our downloads going up like crazy here in June. Up significant numbers, both from a YouTube view standpoint and from a podcast download standpoint. So you guys are doing your part, and we cannot tell you how much we appreciate the support that y'all have shown us here over the last couple years. So let's not waste any time. We'll get to the news and notes. We'll get to the mailbag segment here in a moment, but let's start with some of the comments and the statements of the year in college football. Some bold statements, whether we love it, like it, or not so fast, my friend. All right, we'll kick it off here with a segment that we've never quite done before. We've done variations of this segment in the past, so you're probably familiar with the format, but the way we're branding it is a little different from what we've done in the previous times we've done it. So here's the way we're going about it today. Love it, like it, not so fast, my friend, okay? So basically, we love it, it's okay. Not so fast, my friend, means we really don't like it. So, Coobs, where are we starting?
All right, we're going to start off with Miami. The fact that they will get their first 10-plus win season since 2017.
This one I like. I don't love. I'm close to loving this one. I really am. And I know people are still a little hesitant to jump on board the Miami bandwagon. And you get burned by it before. We've fallen in love with teams comparable to this in the past, only to see things kind of fall sideways. But if you look at what they've accumulated from a talent standpoint, some of the additions they've made, not just in the portal, but you also look too at how the staff has proven an ability already with Ruben Bain last year to put in a young player and to see him flourish in year number one as a starter. Granted, as a freshman, but still flourished nonetheless. The right tackle last year, Francis Maui-Noah, true freshman, thrust right into the starting lineup, didn't skip a beat, even though there were some growing pains early. As the season went along, he played better and better and would anticipate all ACC contender status from him this year. So when you look at their schedule, I feel like there's 5 possible slip-ups for the Miami Hurricanes. 5. And that's really not a lot when taking things into account. And I actually think things set up okay for them. On the road at Florida week 1, that's a tough game. But if you really look at the personnel that Miami has and the personnel that Florida has, I think Miami has an advantage there. Now, granted, Florida has the home field advantage, which is something that will be difficult to overcome. But either way, Miami should be in a good position to win that game. Now, if they get that one, then you're looking at a possibility of 4 games that are losable down the stretch. Virginia Tech, that game's at home. I like their chances in that game, even though that's a tricky one there against a team that I think has a chance to be a legitimate dark horse in the ACC. You get at Cal on October 5th. Don't sleep on this game. Don't sleep on it. I think a lot of people will. They're going to look and say, oh, well, Miami, they're cruising. At this point, man, they're 4-0, 5-0, 4-1, whatever their record is. They're going to go to Cal and they'll take care of business. Yeah, what if that game's at 10:30 Eastern time? And they got to kick off at 10:30 Eastern time in Berkeley. Strange environment, and it might be a trickier road trip than most people anticipate. Then they travel back after that one, get a bye week, which is comfortable, and they go to Louisville. That's also, I think, a really difficult game. I think they can get Louisville. Louisville's very dependent on the quarterback's health. Tyler Shuck's been talented in the past, but will he be healthy enough to get through the season and continue to keep Louisville within striking distance of the ACC title game? I think he can be, but that's a big question mark. And then finally, Florida State comes to Miami. Now, we know what it looked like a couple years ago, but this Miami team improved by leaps and bounds from year one under Mario Cristobal to year two. I would anticipate a significant leap from year 2 to year 3. So I like this comment, but I'm not quite there just yet to say I love it, but they are certainly on the short list of teams that I think can absolutely get to the 10-win plateau.
All right, moving on to the next one. Marcus Freeman will keep the Notre Dame tradition alive with third-year head coaches winning national championships. Love it, like it, or not so fast, my friend?
Not so fast, my friend, on this one. Now, for those that are unaware, I actually didn't know about this until probably, I don't know, earlier this off season. This was not some trend that I was super familiar with. Why? Because I wasn't paying that close attention to Brian Kelly and Notre Dame leading into the 2012 season, thinking, oh, you know what, he could win a national championship this year. They had gone 8-5 the 2 years prior, but sure enough, year 3, Notre Dame head coaches, there's this air of mystique around what they can do in year number 3. And I don't think it's an indicator of future success or current success, what have you. I just think it's been kind of random the way it's all worked out. But for those that are unfamiliar, I had to familiarize myself as well. Ara Parseghian, back in 1966, went 9-0-1 in his third year. Okay, won the national championship. One of the best coaches in the history of Notre Dame. It should come as no surprise. Now, his successor, Dan Devine, won the national championship in 1977. They were 11-1 and won the national championship. That was his third year as well. Lou Holtz went 5-6, 8-4 in his first 2 years, and then in 1988, he went 12-0 en route to the national championship there for the Fighting Irish. And then Brian Kelly, his first couple years, 8-5. His third year, they get to the national championship in 2012. And then there were other examples too. If you really want to go way back into like the 40s and the 30s and the 20s, there are other examples of year 3 coaches for Notre Dame having success. But that's basically where it's at. Well, guess what? Fast forward to 2024, it's Marcus Freeman's third year. I don't think Notre Dame's winning a national championship this year. I don't. I think they have the defense to compete for a national championship. I think all 3 levels defensively have a chance to be legit. I still have question marks about whether or not they have true game changers at the wide receiver position. And I am super concerned about them replacing the offensive tackles. I am. I think they'll still run the ball with great effectiveness. I think Riley Leonard's a rock solid quarterback, even though the accuracy I would like to see improve just ever so slightly this year from where he was the last 2 at Duke. But I look at this year's team and I think they are a playoff contender, but not a playoff championship contender. I think they can make the playoff. I just don't know if they can win the whole thing. You know what I mean? So this one, I'm going to go as far as to say not so fast, my friend, even though I do think by season's end, they will be in the top 12 competing for a national championship.
All right, we will see. Also, Frank Leahy won his first title in his third year. Moving on. Syracuse will win 10-plus games for the first time since 2018. Love it, like it, or not so fast, my friend?
Not so fast, my friend. And while if you look at what Syracuse has done as far as their talent upgrade this offseason, it's notable. I mean, you cannot sit here and say, oh, you know, this team looking at it year over year, 23 to 24, they are much more talented at multiple different positions, okay? And they retained some talent too. Aronde Gadsden's back, like a handful of other guys that are legit. Marlo Wax is back. Like they have good players that have returned. I do think they've upgraded the quarterback spot. Schrader was a good athlete, could run around, do a lot of things, but I do think Kyle McCord is going to be a little more prototypical, a little bit more predictable from the pocket. So I think he's a solid option as well. They also avoid some legitimate heavyweights in Florida State, Clemson, and North Carolina. Like they're not playing any of those teams in their schedule this year. And then I look at the schedule, I'm like, all right, it's for the most part manageable. You get Georgia Tech, they're at home. You got Stanford. They're at home. You get Holy Cross in Ohio. There's a real possibility that Syracuse could start the season 4-0. I mean, that is well within reason. Then you go to UNLV. UNLV lost an awful lot after a really nice season last year. They could be 5-0 before they go to NC State, where I don't think it's going to be a great matchup for the Orange. So I think NC State's really good this year, by the way. So that would be one I'd be really curious about. One of the biggest, most telling games that we're going to have from Syracuse is actually at Pitt. There on October 24th. That's a Thursday game right after the bye week. And I think Pitt and Syracuse are kind of in the same spot in the pecking order there in the ACC. 9, 10, 11, kind of in that middle tier. Remember, there's 17 teams in the ACC now, so they're going to be somewhere they're kind of in the middle. And the back end of the stretch gets a little bit more difficult. Virginia Tech, at Boston College, at Cal. I've already referenced if Cal's dangerous for Miami, they're definitely going to be dangerous for Syracuse. And speaking of, they get Miami there at the end of the season. That game will be in Syracuse, though. So maybe they catch Miami on a bad night and they knock them off there in the season finale. I look at their talent upgrades, though, and it's significant. They are much, much better than they've been in the past. But to go as far as to say they're going to get to the double-digit wins, that's where I have a difficult time. Miami, Pitt, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech. I mean, these are all games that are losable. NC State, to think that they're going to win almost all of the aforementioned games is a tough one for me to predict. And to think, too, first-year head coach, there's not going to be a slip-up or two that you don't expect. That's also difficult for me to expect as well. So while I think Syracuse is going to be way improved from where they were a year ago, I still am not buying stock in double-digit wins just yet. So not so fast, my friend, with the Syracuse Orange.
All right, moving on to the SEC, and Tennessee is being overlooked as a potential SEC playoff team.
But are they being overlooked? Like, I don't think they are. So I'm going to say not so fast, my friend, here either, because I think most people, when sizing up the SEC, most people have it in some order. They have Georgia 1, they have Bama 2, Texas 3, or Texas 2, Bama 3. However you size up the top three are, for the most part, universal. And then you have Ole Miss and Missouri and LSU and Tennessee. I mean, those are kind of across the board the top 7, according to most publications. Now, you might be able to sneak in Oklahoma in there, depending on how you evaluate what they have. Some people would remove LSU from that conversation. I personally wouldn't. I just think the top 7 are pretty clear cut in the SEC. And while I think the SEC is more than likely going to get 3 teams in the playoff, I think 4 is well within reason. And looking too at how things set up for Tennessee, they really have to beat one of 2 teams. They have to beat Bama and or Georgia. They got to win one of the 2. I mean, it's as simple as that. And I think Nico Iamaleava, and he might come out and become Hendon Hooker 2.0. He also might come out and become Joe Milton. We don't know. We just don't know. And while I am really optimistic about the pedigree and what he's showcased in his lone start last year against Iowa, there's a lot for me to feel really confident about, a lot. I also acknowledge, too, that Nico's not going to be out there by himself. I mean, they bring back an offensive line that has some guys that can flat out anchor it, whether it's Cooper Mays, Lance Hurd. You got some skill players back at the wide receiver spot like Brew McCoy, Squirrel White, Chris Brazzell, transfer from Tulane. There's a lot to like about what they have from a personnel standpoint. And then defensively, you got a really good pass rush. We know James Pierce can get it off the edge. I think secondary is one of the biggest question marks, but they should be better at that spot. So I don't think you can sit there and say Tennessee's a dark horse playoff contender. I think Tennessee is universally considered by most to be a team that very well could find themselves in the playoff mix if Nico pans out the way they think he's going to pan out. So I think the comment is more negative, and I think there's more positivity around Tennessee's, which why I'm going to say they are absolutely a playoff contender. So the aforementioned comment is a not so fast, my friend.
Good explanation. All right, moving on to this one. I like this one. Kalen DeBoer will have the most successful first year in Alabama football history. Love it. Like it, or not so fast, my friend.
Love it. But here's what's most fascinating about this, and you listening out there on the podcast platform or on the ESPN College Football YouTube channel, you probably didn't realize how many coaches have struggled at Alabama in their first year, including Nick Saban, who went 7-6 in his first year in Tuscaloosa, including Bear Bryant, who went 5-4-1 in his first year back in 1958. Now, I did not realize this, that the first year for Alabama coaches has traditionally been really, really underwhelming. So if we go back, Nick Saban 7-6, Mike Shula in 2003 was 4-9, Dennis Franchione in 2001 was 7-5, Mike Dubose in 97 was 4-7, Gene Stallings back in 87 was 7-5, Bill Curry 7-5 in 80 back then as well. Ray Perkins in 83 was 8-4. That's the best record, I might add. 8-4 in 1983, and this was in the modern era, so I actually stopped it with Bear Bryant back at 5-4-1 back in 1958. Now, there was one other coach that eclipsed the 8-win mark, but that was in like 1941 or whenever it was. So I look at the modern era, starting with Bear Bryant to where Alabama's at now, which is even more kind of surprising. There's only been 8 head coaches for Alabama since that time frame, since 1958. Just goes to show you how long Bear was there and how long Saban was there. But either way, I think if you look at it, I would be highly surprised if Alabama didn't win at least 9 games this year. If you look at their schedule, it sets up pretty well. Now, I'm not saying that the schedule's easy. I just think it sets up well. So you have 4 difficult games to start the season. We know what those 4 are. A couple of non-conference, then you get Wisconsin. Things are not easy out of the gate, but after the game against Georgia, you get a bye week. Okay? So you're looking at it, and things are looking pretty good. You get a bye week, get to kind of take a sigh of relief, and then you get 4 more difficult games. But some of those games in the second stretch are at home. You get a game against Ole Miss, or a game against Missouri at home, You get a game against Vanderbilt. You get a game against South Carolina. That game's at home. Like, you look at their second stretch, you get a game against Tennessee. That's on the road. But if you look at kind of how it sets up okay with where they fall on the schedule. And then you get another rest. You get another break. Exhale, regroup for the final stretch. Then you look at what they have down the stretch. At Bama, at LSU, at Oklahoma, the Iron Bowl's at home. It's a tough schedule. There's no denying that. It's a very tough schedule. Everyone in the SEC, everyone in the Big Ten, everyone everywhere has a difficult schedule here in 2024, it feels like. But I think the way the schedule sets up to where it's almost like a first quarter, second quarter, fourth quarter, skipping the third quarter because it doesn't really matter. Basically, the beginning of the game, the middle of the game, and the end of the game, you have a little break in between each. So I feel like things set up pretty well for them. And I look at what they bring back too. I think they bring back quality personnel offensively. I think the offensive line has a chance to be really, really good. I think the running game has a chance to be really good, especially if they continue to rely on Jalen Milroe's legs. I think defensively, the big question mark is really up the middle of the defense, but assuming Jaheim Otis is at 100%, they should be pretty good there. Linebackers a position of strength. Secondary was once, at one point of this offseason, a big question mark, a huge position of concern. I don't think it is anymore with some of the additions they've made in the portal. They go out and get Keon Sabb. They're really thrilled with the way the freshmen have developed so far up to this point. Damani Jackson, who transferred in from SC, has been a real bright spot at one of the corner spots. So I actually think when you look at it, the position that was most concerning is not necessarily at the top of the list as far as fear is concerned anymore. So I think Bama is going to be really good. And like I said, I'm not necessarily predicting them to go out and go 12-0, but to think that they can't eclipse the 8-win mark is ludicrous. And that's the best mark for a first-year head coach in Bama history.
All right, moving on to the next one. You've brought this team up a few times. Virginia Tech. They will win 9 games for the first time since 2017. Love it. Like it, or not so fast, my friend?
I think it's definitely possible. I'm going to say like it, which is kind of a in-the-middle type of answer. Like it, don't love it. Partly because while there was reason to be very optimistic with what we saw from Virginia Tech last year, there was a lot of reason to be really excited about it. Whether it was the emergence of Kyron Drones, who goes out and accounts for 22 touchdowns, whether it was the way when he was thrust into the lineup, the running game just opened up completely. You realize that before he took over as the starting quarterback. They were rushing for like 60 yards a game. Then they rushed after he took over for like 213 rushing yards per game. I mean, just completely opened things up for what they were offensively. I also look too at the wide receiver room, and man, the receivers are excellent. I mean, really, really good. Ollie Jennings is back from the knee injury. You got Daquan Felton, which I know they feel good about, alongside Jalen Lane and alongside Steven Gosnell back. Those guys combined for over 100 catches and 1,500 yards. So there's a lot to like about what they have from a weapon standpoint, quarterback spot, while the offensive line is, I guess, a bit of a question mark. They did add a notable transfer at that position, and they bring back mostly intact some of the guys that played pivotal moments at times last year. Defensively, the big question mark was how could they stop the run? How are they going to be up the middle of the defense? Will they go out and they add 3 guys in the portal that should improve the depth and improve the competition at that position? The secondary is arguably the best in the ACC. Like, you have maybe the best tandem of corners in the ACC. So there's a lot to feel good about. But here's the problem. For those that are sitting there saying, well, man, you know what? Virginia Tech's a legitimate dark horse playoff contender. I can understand your thought process based on how they really rounded into form down the stretch last year. But here's the issue. Against top competition last year, it did not go well for them. Top competition. Now, people might interpret top competition differently, but I view top competition as teams that were competing at or near the top of the league. And I look at Florida State, Louisville, and NC State last year. Those 3 games for Virginia Tech did not go very well. They lost a combined 108-48 in those 3 games. And that's not good enough. So if you want to get to the 9-win, 10-win, ACC championship, college football playoff caliber teams, they're way more competitive against the best teams on their schedule. And that, I think, is the next step for Virginia Tech as they continue to progress under Brent Pry. I'm optimistic about them. I think they're dangerous. But having them up there near the 10-win plateau feels a little bit too aggressive at the moment based on how they fared against competition that was at that level last year.
All right, next one comes from Iowa here. Iowa's offense will average more than 30 points per game for just the 8th time under Kirk Ferentz. Love it, like it, or not so fast, my friend?
Anyone else surprised that they've done it 8 times?
7 times. 7 times prior. This would be the 8th.
7 times prior. Now, granted, he's been there 24 years, so about 1 out of 3, they cycle up and potentially get some things done offensively. All right, so here's where Iowa was last year. Okay, 30 points per game is a really nice mark. That makes you basically top 50 in the country offensively. So you're not asking for much from a points per game perspective. But Iowa was 132nd last year. 132nd last year, meaning they scored just 15.4 points per game, okay? A 50-spot improvement. 50-spot improvement from 132 to 82 would quantify an increase of 9 points per game. So in order to get to 82, they need to score around 24.5 points per game. And if you improve a position group or a side of the ball by 50 spots, you're in the running for legit Coach of the Year consideration. And do you think Tim Lester is going to be in a position where, and he's the new offensive coordinator for those that are unaware, Tim Lester, former Western Michigan head coach, if they improve by 50 spots, he's going to have some people voting for him in the Broyles Award. But how many times, seriously, how many times have we seen a group improve by 50 plus spots in one specific category? Not often. It's actually quite rare. I think most optimistic Iowa fans would say, man, if we can get to like top 75 in scoring offense, that'd be amazing. Well, good. Top 75 is going to be about 25 points per game, which means you're still 5 points away from getting over the hump and getting to that 30-win plateau, or that 30-point per game plateau. Just so you know, just so you have a frame of reference, Jacksonville State last year was 49th in the FBS with 30.15 points per game. UAB was 51st at 29.92. So you need to get now, if you want to get in the top 50, you got to score 30 points per game. Now, Tim Lester isn't necessarily without personnel that can potentially aid in that improvement. A healthy Cade McNamara is going to go a really long way. A healthy Luke Lachey is going to be really important at tight end for them because he's going to have to probably overcompensate for a slightly underwhelming wide receiver core. Here's the other thing that's concerning. If you look at the offensive line, they should be better than they are. They've kind of underperformed and have been somewhat underwhelming for the last couple of years. So I think they have a chance to be much better offensively. I'd be surprised if they weren't. But to think that they're going to get to 30 points per game, yeah, that warrants a not so fast, my friend.
All right, we're going to keep it in the Big Ten here. There are at least 5 teams that could legit win the Big Ten, making the conference more balanced than it's ever been before. Love it, like it, or not so fast, my friend?
Not so fast, my friend. We have a lot of not so fast, my friends, this today, it seems like. And it really wasn't intentional, too. I'm just going question by question. And now I'm thinking, man, maybe we should have mixed in some positivity there at some point. This might be positive, though. If you're one of the 4 teams that I think that can win the Big Ten, I look at the 4 teams. I look at Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan, and Penn State. All right. Those teams, to me, are legitimate Big Ten contenders. Now, Vegas agrees with me too, by the way. All those teams are between 2-1 and 7-1 as far as odds to win the Big Ten. And then there's a huge gap. And then you get to the 5th team as far as odds are concerned. That would be USC at plus 24-1. 24-1 for the USC Trojans, followed closely by Iowa at 35-1. Nebraska at 60-1, Washington at 60-1, and Wisconsin at 80-1. So the question is, there are 5 teams that could legitimately win the Big Ten. Who are the 5? Because I think we all, gun to head, are going to sit there and say, yeah, I feel great about Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, and Michigan. And you might not even feel great about Penn State based on what they've done up to this point. But if you look at what they bring back, Andy Kotelnicki there offensively, like they should be in a pretty good spot. And let's be real, can you even feel great about Michigan? Now, I like Michigan still this year. Why? Because I like their defense. I love their defense at all 3 levels. I think they have a chance to be super elite defensively. But offensively speaking, are they going to be as good? I think that's a legitimate question. At quarterback, are they going to be anywhere near as good? I think at running back, they'll be fine. I think at the offensive line, probably a slight dip from what they were a year ago. At wide receiver, probably about the same. Tight end, going to be excellent. So there's a lot to like about what Michigan has, but there has been a lot of turnover as well. So to sit there and say, oh yeah, without a shadow of a doubt, Michigan is a Big Ten contender, no doubt, is a little tougher to justify this year than it has been in the last couple of years. So I say not so fast, my friend, because I don't think the Big Ten is as balanced as it's been in a while. I think the Big Ten is top heavy, just like it's been the last couple of years. I think there's a pretty big gap, frankly, behind Ohio State, Oregon, and everybody else. Now, I think Michigan and Penn State are closer than the others, but if you want to get beyond Michigan and Penn State, I think there's a gigantic gap between them and USC, who I would have as the 5th best team coming into the 2024 season. So I'm going to say a not so fast, my friend, because I actually think the Big Ten is kind of consolidated at the top. And that's not as much a knock on the teams that are competing for it. It's more of a testament to how good I think the teams are at the top of the league.
All right, fair enough. Moving on. Both Louisville and Kentucky are being overlooked heading into 2024. Love it, like it, or not so fast, my friend?
Love it. I think they're both being completely overlooked. And I'm probably as much a reason why as anyone. Let's start with Kentucky for the moment. Now, Kentucky's defense was at times unrecognizably average last year by their standards. I mean, if you think about what Kentucky has done in the last 5 years under Mark Stoops, they've been excellent along the offensive line. Not all the time, because 2 years ago it wasn't good. Last year it was just okay. that has been a position group that has dipped drastically, and they've been really solid on the defensive side. Well, last year, defensively, they just weren't as consistent as they've been in the past. I don't know why that is. Tackling in some cases, I don't think they had the depth last year that they've had in other years, and I just think there have been some struggles for that group on that side of the ball. So I look at it, I would expect them to be much better along the offensive line. I think they'll be better on the defensive side. I think quarterback play this year will hopefully be better for Kentucky. Now, Brock Vandegrift steps into the shoes of Devin Leary. Now, while Devin Leary had a ton of experience and a live arm, I also think that arm was a little too live from time to time. The guy threw bullets and they were uncatchable. That's why Kentucky last year led the country in drops. Not just because the receivers lack concentration, which was certainly a factor, but also because their quarterback threw it way too hard and the passes were uncatchable. So I think Kentucky is one of those teams that is being slept on a little bit coming into the season, but are they really going to be good enough to compete at the top of the SEC this year? I think Kentucky's like an 8-4 football team, maybe a 7-5 football team, depending on how things break their way. But are they going to be able to out Georgia? Possibly. I doubt it, but possibly. I think it's probably pretty unlikely, especially after looking at how they played against them last year. Are they going to be able to handle some of the teams that are on their schedule? Man, it's tough to expect that. It really is. So I think Kentucky's kind of a team that's going to finish 9th, 10th in the league, but that might be 7-5. That might be 8-4 with a couple of big wins at their disposal. So yes, they're probably super undervalued. And then for Louisville, just so much turnover. Like, we loved them last year, partly because I felt like some of the pieces that were flocking to Louisville by way of the portal were really, really solid, and I believe that much in Jeff Brom. Now, this year, I don't think they're slept on as much as they were last year, but last year, you just got the sense that there was going to be a real us against the world mentality. No one's talking about us. No one's respecting us. And Jeff Brom is going to have the element of surprise up his sleeve throughout the course of the season. I think they have a good quarterback in Tyler Shough. Got to stay healthy. I think they'll be able to run the ball. Feel pretty confident about that. I think defensively, you have some massive difference makers along the defensive line, including a guy that should be, in All-American contention, and Ashton Gelati off the end of the line of scrimmage. So I look at their personnel, and I think Louisville's really solid. Really solid. And no one seems to be really talking about them. All anyone's talking about in the ACC is Florida State, Miami, and gosh, I guess you could say Florida State, Miami, and Clemson. I mean, I think Clemson's being slept on a little too, to be honest with you. So no one's really talking about Louisville. They're just sliding over there, them alongside NC State, alongside some other teams that have really good personnel. And maybe this is the year that they can break through and make some noise.
All right, last one we have here. USC has to get through September at least 3-1 or better, or it's going to be a long year for the men of Troy. Love it, like it, or not so fast, my friend?
Well, here's where I'm at right now. How likely is it that USC will be 3-1? As I feel like if they're 3-1, that's like an incredibly good start to the season. That means you beat either Michigan at Michigan or LSU in Las Vegas. Like, either one of those two wins is massive for Lincoln Riley. Now, if he wins one of the two, you're in great shape. If you lose them both, I don't even think your season's over. So even if you're sitting there 2-2, you beat Wisconsin, which I think would be a great win there in the Coliseum at the end of September. Then you get into the second part of your schedule. And I think the second part of the schedule for SC is more manageable than even the first month of the season. In October, you have at Minnesota. That's a game that you can absolutely, and hopefully for SC fans, you do win. You got Penn State at your place. That's a game that I think that can be won. I would lean Penn State at the moment, but I think that is a game that can absolutely be won. You're at Maryland. Going to be a tough road trip for sure, but one that can be won without question. Rutgers comes to you, another game that can be won. Those, to me, I think those games, October is going to define USC's season because there are winnable games on that part of the schedule. Now, if you go beat LSU, you're going to shock a lot of people. If you go beat Michigan at Michigan, you're going to shock everybody, especially knowing how Michigan has played and how Michigan controls the line of scrimmage, and that has been a bit of a question mark for you up to this point. I also think there's a really good chance that they could finish strong as well. You got at Washington, USC right now on paper, better than Washington. More things figured out. Nebraska comes to you. I think this is a game that SC should win at home. a game that they should win against Nebraska. At UCLA, they're better than UCLA right now. That should be a game they win. And then Notre Dame comes to you at home. In the final game of the year, Notre Dame's going to be playing for their playoff life. Maybe you can upset them in a game right now that I think most people would lean towards the Irish. So I actually think things set up pretty well for USC this year. So I'm going to say not so fast, my friend, on the original prognostication. They have to get off to a 3-1 start to have a decent year. I don't agree with that. I think they get off to a 2-2 start and still have plenty of meat on the bone with some of the matchups they have in October and November to potentially get back to relevance by season's end. Now moving into our mailbag, we appreciate all of you guys for submitting questions via our social media at AlwaysCFB. That's on Instagram and on Twitter. You can also email the show at alwayscollegefootball@gmail.com. So we've got some great questions there as well. So Cougs, where are we going today?
All right, we're going to start off with Jet. They asked, do you see Alabama or Auburn playing in state schools similarly to the way we see Texas, Florida, and now North Carolina and Kentucky playing in state schools? Also, do you anticipate this being a growing stance from the state legislatures overall, with North Carolina and NC State being obligated to face G5 schools until 2031?
One, no, I don't think Alabama will do that, or Auburn for the matter. Now, Auburn more likely to do it than Alabama, but I just don't envision a scenario where the board and those that are making decisions on behalf of Alabama start to say, you got to play Troy, you got to play South Alabama, you got to play UAB. I just don't envision that happening, just being real. So when I look what the legislatures are doing, that is a way to monetize the smaller schools by allowing them the opportunity to create a home and home with the bigger schools in the state. I think it'd be wise for state legislatures to put this in place, but I also don't think it's going to happen in some places. I just think Alabama has too much power. Auburn has too much power to force them to potentially do it. I think you could in other places, but highly unlikely for it to happen in some schools. Like all of a sudden, are you going to force Georgia to start playing at Georgia Southern? I don't think that's likely. Are you going to force Florida State to play at FIU? No, I don't see it happening like that. I think in some places you can get away with it, but it's going to be really hard to force a college football playoff contending program to go on the road to a small school in their state for charitable reasons every single year. I just don't see it happening.
That's fair. Okay, next one comes from Susan in Michigan. And she asks, what's the difference between an official visit and when a recruit comes to visit?
Well, an official visit, you get 5 as a recruit, or at least you used to get 5. You might be able to take as many as you want now with NIL. I mean, there are no rules, so why would they limit us to just 5 visits? You get 5 traditionally, and basically it's so you're not just taking vacations all over the place, and it kind of protects the school a little bit. So they are responsible for every single thing that you do as a recruit while on campus for an official visit. There used to be a lot more rules and what you can get away with and what could be spent on official visits. Now it's completely financed by the university. So that's the difference. The official visit, you are basically everything from the second you leave your house, the second you arrive back at your house is financed by the institution. And an unofficial visit means that basically you're paying your own way to get there. You're paying your own way once you get there as well. Now, you can engage in different experiences. If you want to go to a photo shoot, if you want to go to camp, if you want to go tour the facilities, you can do all those things, but it's at your own expense. So that's the real big difference. The unofficial visit, you don't have to pay for anything. Or the official visit, you have to pay for nothing. The unofficial visit, you have to pay for everything. But now with NIL, like I said, there's probably ways around it.
All right, next question comes from Aaron. And they want to know, I used to be a videographer for Louisiana Tech, which is a group of 5 school. I'm wondering if this new playoff system, does the group of 5 need their own? I'm assuming playoff.
Yes. In time, I think it's going to be beneficial, but let's see how it plays out, Aaron. And here's what I'm curious about. If for whatever, let's just say Memphis makes the college football playoff this year, just using them as an example. Let's say Memphis makes the college football playoff and they go and they have to play at Penn State in the first round of the playoff, and they get beat 48-14. Is that good for Memphis that they got in and got beat badly? For instance, last year, was it good for Liberty to make it to the Fiesta Bowl? I know they got a big check. That's great. They got to the Fiesta Bowl and got their doors blown off by Oregon. And we've seen more and more here in recent years, the G5 and the P5, because of the transfer portal, because guys are leaving G5 programs to go play at P5 institutions, the gap has gotten wider than ever. So let's just see how it plays out here in the 12-team playoff. Because if there is a scenario where those games between G5 and P5 teams are not competitive, then I think there might be a little bit more momentum towards creating a G5 playoff in addition to the Power 5 playoff that is currently constructed.
All right. The last question today comes from Corey in South Carolina. They ask, how good can West Virginia's season be if they can win their first game versus Penn State in Morgantown?
It would be huge. Because I remember we did the backyard brawl last year, and I remember at that point thinking, okay, I think West Virginia is okay, but 9 wins, I don't see that happening. Sure enough, that's what Neil Brown and company did. And not only did they get to 9 wins, but they established some stars along the way. I think everybody in college football knows who Garrett Green is after his performance at quarterback last year. It really blossomed onto the scene. Top 10 quarterback in the country, according to some publications. I think he's done a great job. You have a ground and pound identity too. Like West Virginia, when I turn on the tape and I watch West Virginia, I know what I'm going to get. I know what I'm going to see when I see Jaheim White. I know what I'm going to see when I saw CJ Donaldson last year. I mean, when you watch those guys, you knew what to expect for West Virginia. Couple that with the passing attack with, I think, some weapons that were really, really solid last year. You bring in Bray, transfer from Oklahoma State, too. Then you look at the schedule. And this is really the first time since West Virginia's been in the Big 12 that they don't have some insurmountable schedule as it relates to road trips. Okay, they have a trip to Cincinnati. Easy trip for them. And then they go to Tucson. Tough trip, no doubt about it. But if you think about what West Virginia has dealt with since they joined the Big 12, man, every single year it's like they were operating with one arm tied behind their back because of their travel schedule. And that's just not the case this year. So I think it's massive for them to establish what they did last year, for them to establish some key playmakers and difference makers. The schedule sets up nicely for them. And then the defense, I think, is going to have to continue to improve. But man, if they can somehow pull off that win against Penn State early in the year, that would be one of the biggest shocks. We talked about non-conference games last week. That's one that's on my list. No one's talking about it because I still don't think enough people have paid attention to what West Virginia did in 2023, but they need to start because I think that is a very dangerous game for Penn State when playing against a team with nothing to lose that has expectations of doing some of their own things there in the Big 12. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Continue to like, rate, and subscribe to the show wherever you get your show. We appreciate you guys very much downloading the show, all the different places that you're downloading it from, on the Spodcast platform, on the Apple Podcast, Spotify platform, Apple Podcast platform, and then here with us on the ESPN YouTube channel. Hit that thumbs up button right below the video if you've liked what you've seen so far today. Great time kind of diving through some different topics. We are going to have some special guests join the show at some point this week. We are scheduled to have Ryan Day on the show at some point, scheduled to have Kirby Smart on the show at some point. Kalen DeBoer will join the show at some point here very soon as well as Steve Sarkisian of the Texas Longhorns. So we'll keep it locked in here at Always College Football. Your favorite coach might be coming up here in the next couple days. So for all of us here at Always College Football, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, and Griffin, I'm Greg. We hope you have a tremendous day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.